Originally produced by our team at Ingenuity Radio in 2002, Searching for the New Liberalism is a 9-part series adapted for this podcast, The Life of a Servant.
Welcome to Part 1. This is the introductory segment, and features Howard Aster, Tom Axworthy, Richard O'Hagan, John Roberts, and Lloyd Axworthy.
Good morning, my name is Howard Aster. I'm told I'm one of the co-hosts of this conference. I'm not sure what that means, but good morning nonetheless. And welcome to the conference entitled Searching for the New Liberalism. We start with a bit of another biographical note. For me, this conference started some 4 or 5 years ago. At that time, I had a conversation with my chum, who was a university student. He was at UO. And he reminded me of a conversation that both he and I had with Senator Keith Davey a few years previous to us. It was Senator Davey who, during the course of a lunch conversation with myself and my son, turned to me and asked a very poignant question. I remember the moment very, very distinctly. He said, "What kind of liberal society do you want to live in, and what kind of this liberal society do you want to pass on to your son?" And that question remained unanswered for me for many years, for these many years. But for both my son and myself, the question remained very, very vital. I recall in subsequent years, my son turning to me every now and then and asking, "Do you remember that question? Well, don't forget it, and make sure that sooner or later you and your friends try to answer that question for us, for the next generation." Well, it took so many years, but here we are. At least I think this is a start to an answer. I think the question is still very, very vital, and that's why it is my hope that this conference, Searching for the New Liberalism, will provide at least a beginning to some of the answers to the question for the next generation. Let me pass quickly over a long period of history. And I remember this summer, I picked up the Herald Tribune. I was in France. It was August 18th, 2002. And it was a warm, sunny morning, and it was near Krakow, Poland. There were over 2 million people assembled in a field called Blonia, which is just outside of Krakow. Those 2 million people constituted over 5% of the entire Polish population. And they were assembled in this field, and of course they were there to see Pope John Paul II on his last visit, probably his last visit to his native homeland. It's very, very interesting. The Pope chose to address the problems of, and let me quote, "the noisy propaganda of liberalism, of freedom without responsibility." He called on his people, despite persistent poverty, with what he called, quote, "creative charity." A very, very intriguing phrase. He then asked his countrymen to help impoverished neighbors, support their families, and educate their children. It is astonishing to me, and I think to many other people, that the Pope would address the problems of liberalism in Poland to his countrymen in those peculiar circumstances. A few weeks earlier, again in Europe, it was Prime Minister Tony Blair who had invited President Bill Clinton to England to a think tank to find creative solutions to the current stagnancy and plight of the New Labour, which in many ways is the new liberalism. And later in August, again in France, the Socialist Party gets together, as they usually do in late summer, at a seaside resort, to discuss problems of politics, but again their agenda mirrors the agenda of the new liberalism. Clearly the questions and dilemmas which lie at the heart of liberalism are being discussed in many places by many people from many political positions. So now it is our turn to take up this discussion and debate and to relocate us into Canada. In many ways, Canada is the best place to carry forward this discussion on liberalism. One can argue, and I would at any rate, that Canada has held the most successful liberal regime of any country in the world. Indeed, if one treats the name of political parties seriously, namely that they reflect something about the political ideology from which they spring, then Canadian liberalism is a powerful reminder of how successful the ideology and the party which draws its name from has been in this country. No other country in the world can claim such a successful liberal party, for so long directing government and by extension affecting the structure of our society in liberal directions. But we shall also be reminded, I think, that liberalism has also been a very, very controversial political ideology and political theory over the past 200 years. One reading of the history of liberalism would assert that it is due to the failure of liberalism that socialism arose. Indeed, it is the critical interplay between these two competing political ideologies and theories that much of the creative politics of the past 150 years has been played out. It is the unfinished business of liberalism in many ways which keeps social democrats alive today. Also, one must not forget that liberalism has been the focus of an ongoing and at times savage critique from the alternative source, namely the political right. Historically, it began with the critique of liberalism by a decaying aristocratic conservatism. But by the late 19th century, that critique became merged with the philosophical right of people such as Joseph de Maistre or people encyclicals and so on. We slice liberalism with modernity, the collapse of values, and the excesses of unfettered economic greed. By the mid-20th century, this critique became extended into a more secular terms by political philosophers such as Leo Strauss and Alistair MacIntyre. The viability of this critique of liberalism today is sustained by Unitarians such as Charles Taylor, and many others. Debate in political philosophy may appear to be far removed from the struggles which take place in the political arena, where resources must be allocated and reallocated, where competing interests vie for political ascendancy, where power and influence predominate. But it's clear today, wherever you go, that during the early years of the 21st century, the search for fundamental political ideas, for vital and viable political discourse, is taking many people, from the Pope to Tony Blair, back to the discourse on liberalism. So what is it? What is it about Canada which has allowed us to maintain liberal discourse so close to the exercise of political power? Is Canada a liberal society? How have political structures, institutions, and policies in Canada over the past century reflected liberal values and liberal discourse? And can these same structures, institutions, and policies continue to reflect a viable liberal discourse in this new century? That is why we are here today, to extend the Canadian discourse on liberalism further. So what do we hope for? What do some of us hope for over the next 2 days? Well, the participants here represent various professions, perspectives, and backgrounds. In concrete terms, there will be a text emerging from this conference, a book. And for those of you who have or are in the process of finishing up your papers, let me just say that the timetable is very, very tight. We have a commitment that the books will be across the country in all chapters and Indigo stores by November 23rd, which means that it will be a great Christmas gift for all Canadians. Independent bookstores as well, of course. Second, at least it's my hope, given my past, that if there is a will on the part of the participants here, that we should be able to extend the intellectual discourse on liberalism in Canada on either an annual or a biannual basis. And that question about where we go shoot from here to be part of the unfinished business of this conference at Sunday afternoon. And third, given my background as a retired professor of political science, it is my hope that the consequence of this conference will be that we can reintroduce students of Canadian politics, right from the high school level to the university level, into the discourse on liberalism. I find it sorrowful that the discourse on Canadian liberalism has had such bad press, such terrible academic reviews, and has all but been purged from the curriculum of the university. It is my hope that with some hard work over a long period of time, all of us can help and repair the damage. It is indeed, I will argue, our duty and obligation to the next generation to make sure that we do so. Let me take a few small housekeeping notes before I pass over the mic to Tom. First of all, your words are being recorded. I have to advise you of the sort. And secondly, it is being recorded live and archived by ingenuity.com. So we will have access to anything that's being said, which is into the technical comment, which is how does the mic system work. There are mics at each table, in front of each chair, and if you push the mic mute, you'll see a green light. That means that the mic is on. So if you don't want anyone to hear what you're saying, make sure it's not on. If you do speak, please press the button, and your voice will be heard. If anybody has overheads, then could you kindly pass them up to myself, and I'll get them organized to project for overhead for your presentation. Just coming to me, and I can get that organized. Again, thank you for coming, and I think we're in for a very, very interesting 2 days. Thank you, Howard. Ladies and gentlemen. First, on, again, some of how we hope that the conference proceeds. Papers have been prepared. They have been on the internet, www.liberalism.ca. Some papers have been in paper form, but those that have been submitted are on the web now. So some people have asked for copies of the papers. This whole conference is based on volunteers, and where we haven't had the copy papers when they're electronically on the net, you haven't. So please go to your computers to see those papers which have been submitted before. And as Howard said, and I want to thank Dennis Mills, who's an example of volunteerism here. And Dennis has played a great role in putting us on Ingenuity Radio at Ingenuity Canada, and that is typical of everybody here who has volunteered their time and their effort to travel, to come together on this weekend to discuss these important issues. I can say that for every person here, Howard and John and myself have had requests from at least 3 or 4 others that they could attend. There's a tremendous thirst for trying to inject ideas into the political system. So I want to thank all of you who wrote papers, who've been active commentators, who have taken notes, who have helped raise money for this conference, for your tremendous example of volunteerism. So we want those who have prepared the papers on the formal panels to speak for no more than 15 minutes. And we have asked others to comment or to be the first discussant to lead the discussion. And we would like people to restrict their remarks to 3 to 5 minutes of the commentators. And then those of you who want the introduction, you have an hour and more for discussion around each of the panels after you finish the discussion. Would you please just introduce yourself and just say a word about yourself so people know who you are? You only do that once. So that we are trying to stay calm this morning rather than going around the table with 60 or 70 people. When I first went to work in Ottawa quite some time ago, I worked for a man called Walter Gordon, who was a management consultant. And he had some very good advice for me then as a young student that I tried to take with me ever since in attending meetings or attending conferences like this. And Walter said that there were 3 things you should try to get out of the conference. The first is, what were the major themes or the consensus that seemed to emerge? Be awake so you can try and see if there's some cohesion that comes out of the discussion. Secondly, is there a fact or a point of view which surprises you? And thirdly, having seen what consensus may or may not emerge, and seeing what surprising facts may or may not emerge, what do you resolve to work on from what you learned at this conference? What do you take away with it? And personally, what will you try to do about it? And that's what Howard said, that this is, we hope to be an ongoing process. If one looks at the papers that have already been in, you begin to see some of the first elements of Mr. Gordon's analysis. What are some overarching themes? Virtually every paper talks about what should be the new priorities for the next decade or the next half century. We all know the tremendous effort Canada has made on the deficit reduction fight. We know, too, that for a generation we have been debating the Constitution, Quebec's role in Canada. Those debates aren't over, but they may not have the primacy for the next few years as they have had for the past generation. So what is the agenda? What is it that we can work on? And a variety of the papers, and I'm sure all of you have your own prescription on how our efforts should be channeled. So priority setting is one task for you liberals. The second is, and paper on the role of the state have reflected that. Once you decide as a group how to promote the values of blockchain liberalism forward, that's the what. You're going to get to the how. What is the role of the state? What new mechanisms do we need? What is the role of the voluntary sector, the not-for-profit sector? Many of the people here have been active in political parties, about half have not, have looked for other avenues for social change. So there, in Professor Bourne's paper and in David Harris' submission, they make the point that with all the changes, reinventing government or thinking of new ways of doing things have not been part really of our agenda. The mechanisms of change have not been much addressed in our country in the recent times, as perhaps they should be. And so the how is part of the new liberal, which is how to carry our objectives forward. And lastly, this was in Lorna Mars's paper on higher education, where she begins by saying, what is the accountability? What do citizens and students really know about the value of our institutions? What is the information exchange? And that leads into a whole range of discussion. It's in my other paper on foreign policy about new means of using the internet and citizen engagement. This conference is one reflection of it. There's a thirst everywhere, a questioning of institutions, many of them, public service, the state, parties as institutions have changed. How does one engage citizens in that noblest of causes, self-government? And that's a theme that has also weaved through those papers that have already been submitted. So we have the what, and we have the how, and we have citizen engagement. I'm sure there will be many more items which are added to that agenda, but I want to begin by thanking you all for volunteering your time and your effort to move the cause of liberalism forward. Now, we will begin, and I'll call on Richard O'Hagan to be the moderator of our first session. Richard himself has had a long background in the party as communication advisor to Mr. Pierce and Mr. Trudeau. He had some experience in Washington and trying to promote the Canadian viewpoint there, and he's been a very senior manager with the Bank of Montreal for many years since. So, Richard, I'll turn it over to you to try to keep our discussions to 15 minutes. And people can, by the way, whatever you feel more comfortable at, either speaking from this mic or speaking from the round table. So, Richard, to you. I think, I say thanks in the perfunctory sense. I think, though, that before we begin, I think we all owe a significant vote of thanks to Tom Axworthy for initiating this conference and if it, just a word of advice, if at some future time you have a lunch or dinner with Tom, which seems on the surface rather pointless and or without objective, and well, if at some future date you have lunch with Tom and or dinner, and he says, I think we need a conference on that, whatever that is, then my advice is pay attention, because it could result in something as useful as that. Promises to be made. Legacy is a word very much in vogue these days, and it's a perfectly good word, and one I think that any self-respecting liberal in the party sense certainly should be proud of, and it enables the Liberal Party, I think, to serve our society to very considerable effect down the years, and that's already been referred to by Howard Aster. So I won't go on about it. That's the substance and the subject of our first panel, and it's a very distinguished panel, I might say, in every respect. We have 4 participants, and I will just say a word about each of them before they're invited to begin their presentation. John Roberts, and they will speak in order of their listing on your program, if you have it here, namely John Roberts, Lloyd Axworthy, McGraw, and Alison Lote. John Roberts was a member of Parliament for 16 years, and in the course of those years, half those years, in fact, he was a member of Cabinet. Before that, and since then, he's been active in academic life, and at one point, in fact, did a major study, a book published, in fact, on the German philosopher Wilhelm Humboldt. He's now chairman of a firm of international film consultants, and is associate editor of the Literary Review of Canada. And I think with that, I'll let you begin, John, and then I'll introduce each of the other 3 speakers. Then their turn comes. But just one point, would you please, we're having each of the 3 speakers present, and then after that, the commentators will be invited to comment. And following that, we'll be open to the broader discussion. So, Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, and good morning. One note of apology first, for reasons which are entirely inexplicable. My paper is not on the web, or at least not yet, but I'm told it will be next week. There are, however, some copies of it available, but there are only 10, so you have to really, really, really want it if you're going to take it now. Otherwise, leave it for those few friends of mine who will be very much interested. I noticed that the organizers in the list have put me down under the simple rubric of philosophy. It's a rather large subject. I've noticed that my academic friends tend to regard me as a politician, and my political friends tend to regard me as an academic. It's been a great handicap in both of my choices of me. My understanding is that I was to give a short analysis of the intellectual foundations of liberalism, its appropriateness for the Canadian context, and some understanding of its certain shortcomings. Howard Aster has already done all of that. But that is not going to deter me in any way from saying what it is that I intended to say. I start off from the 50s, in effect, describing briefly the liberalism of that time, which was the conventional wisdom, largely held in Western democracies that used to be the politically correct, if you like, the appropriate pragmatic framework within which the solutions to political social problems could be found. So that you had political scientists like Daniel Bell and others, for instance, talking about the end of ideology, just as more recently commentators until very recently were talking about the end of politics as a description of that time. It was the automatic framework in which responsible and reasonable people tackled problems. The foundation for
conventional liberalism in the 1950s really goes back, I think, to four essential historical support theory, natural law theory, right theory, utilitarianism, and the argument for some skepticism for liberalism, which I'll come back to in a moment. And therefore, some papers a brief description of how these four, sometimes complementary and sometimes contradictory explanations of support for liberal views intertwine to the introduction position which we had in the 1950s. I said that the argument for skepticism is in some way not the most important of these, but is a glue that brings all of them together. Because natural right theory and natural law theory can be used deeply as a base for arriving at conservative conclusions as liberal conclusions. Utilitarianism is, in its essence, authoritarian. It is really the argument of skepticism. That is to say, we cannot really know with surety how people, what human nature is, or how people should live. We cannot determine those questions absolutely. That what we can only be certain of is what has been called certain uncertainty. And that is that we cannot know definitively that there is a template or a pattern arrived through whatever technique to describe how it is that human beings ought to live, whether they want to or not. And it's that foundation or that glue that brings the other elements into showing the characteristics of modern liberalism. You find that argument, a certain uncertainty, which starts basically with Humboldt and Mill in the 19th century, a variety of people. This is Karl Popper and Solomon, Stuart Hampshire, and Berlin. The result of the intellectual foundation led, I think, to a variety of salient pretests for liberalism by the mid-1950s. And all of the subsidiary principles of the liberal philosophy flow from a basic belief in the value of the freedom of individual choice and conviction with respect to the primacy of the interest of individual citizens is the foundation of political processes and purposes. Its legacy to contemporary liberalism includes the following precepts: the equality of all members of society, rather than class, religious, ethnic, or social distinction as the ordering principle of government. The recognition of individual rights, the rule of law, and democratic structures as a means to the equal protection of the citizen's interests. Insistence on a secular rather than a spiritual or ideological role for government. A belief in freedom of thought and expression, in tolerance, and the promotion of diversity as means both to individual fulfillment and the generation of progress. An attachment to property rights and the structure of free competitive market economy as the best generator of economic growth and prosperity, and the need for government to provide the legal framework to maintain the free and fair working of that economy. An obligation on government to ensure that the pursuit of private sector purposes does not generate extraneous adverse social consequences and thus damage the common good. And government should not only ensure that the government should not only ensure security and stability in society, but also play an active role in expanding opportunity for individuals by programs such as infrastructure development, education, research, and the provision of essential public services at affordable rather than unregulated cost. A commitment to ensuring that the benefits of living collectively in a liberal society are used to help achieve the conditions of social justice by narrowing the disparity of opportunity between those who are disadvantaged and those who are fortunate. And finally, and that's especially important, pragmatism in pursuing and balancing these goals one with another. These characteristics of liberalism are especially appropriate to the social and political conditions of the economy. It applies diversity, federal system, charter of rights, rule of law, democratic institutions, multiculturalism, historically active role for government in economic development, government provision of essential services, and concern for government as a means to social justice, which are rooted in our geography, history, and cultural tradition. The Bolker then goes on to discuss fairly briefly how the Liberal Party took this framework of theoretical liberalism, which are so appropriate to the pluralism of Canadian society, and applied it in practice to the conditions of Canada. And there's a brief description of if you can trace this and looking at the proceedings and the resolutions of the various national conferences that were held and the platforms of the Liberal Party were on them. And you can see that those principles of liberalism were made manifest in an extraordinarily stressful implementation of liberalism in a working fashion. It counts, I think, for the continuing success of the Liberal Party. The success of the Liberal Party has not been as a result of some malign, extraordinary fit of the electoral process. It has been essentially because the Liberal Party has been better than its opponent at understanding and defining and representing a multitude of liberal interests which are, as I suggest, characteristic of liberal society. But if liberalism has such a convincing intellectual foundation, and if its principles are almost ideally suited to the conditions of Canada, and if its implementation through a succession of liberal governments has been so successful, how can one account for the disillusion with liberalism, and large-scale liberalism, that occurred from the mid-1980s almost to the present day? The happy and inflated celebration of liberal political policies became from the 1980s on contested on all sides. And in the world's democracy, the emergence of a multitude of new movements, neoliberal, new conservative, ecological and environmental parties, libertarian, personal development groups, parties of collectivism, a whole range of new religious cults. Liberalism no longer seems to be the automatic task he should follow to features. It has been attacked on practical grounds, it has not worked, and on ideological grounds, that its values or professed values are empty or a distortion of reality. It will be tempting, and perhaps to some extent correct, to argue that liberalism has become more doubted because it in fact has worked, that it seeks to provide opportunity for the disadvantaged, and to the extent that it succeeds in giving that opportunity and creating prosperity, it uses a society where people are better off. It therefore, to some extent, may plant the seeds of its own frustration as a focus for the latest society shift to those who are no longer disadvantaged, but have advantages they wish to conserve and protect. The impulse for liberal policies of redistribution may be weakened. But it is not only the advantage of some to suspect liberalism, the disadvantage to these are the values it espouses, belief in an egalitarian society conflicts with the real distribution of ownership and wealth. Affected by the appearance of the real distribution of ownership, wealth, and power in our political and economic right does not correspond to the ideals of democratic liberals. The middle classes as well have their expectations that they are entitled to regard the material rewards of good right, and that their traditional position in society will be respected. But they bear a heavy tax burden, and they become more and more suspicious that their tax burden is supporting inefficient, wasteful government policies to those who are. So liberalism is not simply a victim of its past success. Its problems are also rooted in the nature of the changing nature of our society, particularly the substance and taste of change. And so it is that the conventional wisdom that has supported liberalism and its policies began to change. The characteristic of conventional wisdom is not that it is necessarily wise, but that it is convenient. By the mid-1980s, the precepts of liberalism also no longer seem convenient. That is, they no longer seem to be successful. The old liberal approaches, which had supported prosperity in the post-war years, seemed not to work in the new world of the 1980s, the world of stagflation, the problem of implementing change in economics in very open society, the huge face of the huge deficits and their impacts had been created by the Vietnam War and Johnson's decision to pursue the Great Society at the same time, by the shock of OPEC increases, the fine-tuning of the economy through microeconomic management proved a difficult task. It's hardly surprising that in this context of social frustration and economic confusion, the vacuum was filled by the policies of new conservatism, with a proud disdain for the public realm and the attractive notion that the new problems of economic management were too complicated for government to manage, and we were assured that the simple technique of market fundamentalism would set all problems straight. One had only to dismantle the role of government to rescue visible hands of unfettered markets, reward the able, and allocate the resources to society that would ultimately, through social Darwinism, be for the collective good. The typical face of that neoconservatism is presented by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, but an intellectual establishment gave it respectability. Milton Friedman, on the economic side, in his rejection of Keynesian economics in favor of monetarist theory, political theorists like Robert Aster argued on the basis of the primacy right for a minimal government and against any role of the state in redistribution, indeed, for any role allowed in the provision of security. Even the most eminent of contemporary liberal thinkers, John Rawls, argues for the acceptability of growing disparities in wealth between the rich and the poor. And the precepts of neoconservatism were strongly reinforced by the establishment of right-wing think tanks, especially in the United States, and a calculated attempt to provide intellectual and academic respectability for the positions of privilege. Few countries in the Western world were immune from these developments, certainly not Canada, and I go on to describe some of the specific problems which became more and more evident by the time we reached the 1980s. The inability, let's say, the lack of credibility of economic management, a decade dominated, in fact, the 1980s, dominated by low productivity, high inflation, and high unemployment, hardly seemed to be a good argument for the cyclical economic management which liberals had claimed. The belief that in so large government could be an efficient or effective manager became increasingly disputed with the enormous expansion of government departments, the plethora almost uncountable of foreign corporations, and growing understanding of the limitation on effective administration and management in the public sector. And third, the foundation of the use of massive expenditure programs which should form the essential network of social security inside of it seemed unlikely to be sustainable on the basis simply of the automatic accrual of the prosperity of the economy. In other words, hard choices would have to be made. I then go on to suggest, however, that the conservatives or the neoconservative approach, both in philosophy and in practice, has fallen far short of what its advocates would have suggested should have occurred. Sadly, in both Canada and the United States, it's sadly governments with enormous debt loads. In both countries, it led to a growing gap between those who are rich and those who are poor. In both countries, it has undermined democratic politics by creating independence from corporate entities. The criticisms of liberal, and this is the conclusion, the criticism of liberalism over the past 2 decades, many of them justified, are not substantially effective criticism of the structure of liberal beliefs and purposes, but rather criticism of technique. The underlying principles of action remain sound, the specific application time faulty. That is an argument not for the rejection of liberal principles, but for a more intelligent use of methods to achieve goals. The times are changing. We are now moving away from a time when selfish purpose was esteemed as the overriding value, culture, exuberant iris, and as a result of the period of important the present circumstances, we are moving toward a time in which responsibility to try, as a society, to nations, to fellow beings, return to the front line of thought and discourse. There is therefore once again an openness to liberal approaches. We do not need a grand new political idea. Today's big new idea often is tomorrow's bust. We do not need an overarching intellectual structure, for we already have one which has served us well and still corresponds to the values of most Canadians. We do not need novelty simply for falseness sake, but that does not mean we do not need new ideas. On the contrary, it is vitally important to use our intellectual imagination, our knowledge, and our experience to come forward with new pragmatic approaches to the inevitably difficult problems we are facing in country. Those new approaches, I am certain, are going to be found within the framework of historical liberalism. It's my hope that this conference will promote your discovery. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Tom and John and Howard and others who brought together another rendition of New Liberalism. I was thinking as I looked around the table that my first New Liberal experience was at the Goya conference in Peterborough. For those of you who are not part of my generation, we did off your ass conference, which I thought was probably as good an acronym for New Liberal as you could possibly think about. I also noticed that some things that are changed. Having attended all those meetings since then, the one thing that was common to them all is the coffee machine doesn't get plugged in at the beginning. Which I suppose is designed to keep liberals raw, rough-edged, and tart-tongued until the coffee break. Either that, or there's pressure on me to make sure I finish before the coffee break, otherwise it'll be a full-scale liberal rebellion. Actually, I feel much more comfortable being here, having been a Western liberal for so long. Being a moving target comes naturally, and I sitting in a seat in downtown Toronto, I always thought it was just a little risky for someone with my background. So we thank you all for inviting us and for having us here, and I'm grateful for John Roberts to have opened up with a broad theoretical philosophical position. The last time I lectured in this room, I was taken to task by one of the senior professors of this faculty who challenged me by saying, well, actually, Felix theory may work in process, but doesn't work in theory. I'm trying to glad we got the theory out of the way first thing in the morning so I can get on with, I hope, would be the practice of liberal. I take at face value the admonition of the title, Searching for New Liberalism. It doesn't say muddling through for new liberalism or dancing on your toes for new liberalism or skating into the corners for new liberalism. It says search it. And the very act of a search means you have to hit certain junction points, certain crossroads, a certain barrier, and you have to make choices. You can't avoid simply slipping and sliding or finding some way in which to cover up the various pathway with brush fire or smoke screen. So what I'm talking about this morning is there's quite some consequences in the way Canada conducts itself internationally. I'm going to start by giving you two quotes, which I think set out check the quote. The first quote is last Friday by President Bush, and I tried to quote directly to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. He said, our forces will be strong enough to dissuade potential adversaries from pursuing military buildup in the hope of passing or equaling the power of the United States, and forestall and prevent such hostile acts by our adversaries. The United States will, if necessary, act preemptively. It's probably the most dramatic restatement of strategic doctrine that's been issued since the containment theory in the mid-1940s. It pretty much sums up the description for Pax Americana, wholly to determine by military activity, the use or threat of use by our superpower neighbor. It is, it's probably the right sort of talk show, ask you how to describe it and provide yourself, well, we're the hub and the rest of the world is the spoke. Pretty much defines where that particular doctrine and theory gets its root. And of course, as we would expect, the shattering conservative class in this country have been actively persuading us that we have no choice but to join that parade. It's just too big, too powerful, too mighty, and our interests are too tied up that we don't have that freedom of choice. Consider the alternative. And I again quote, "These terrorist attacks are a further horrifying indication of the pervasiveness of threats to people's safety, rights, and lives. And as the international community faces the implications of these tragic events, we must recognize that innovative international approaches are needed to address growing sources of global insecurity, remedy its symptoms, and prevent the recurrence of threats that affect the daily lives of millions of people." Unlike many of the outpourings of theories and official statements that took place in the dark days that followed September 11th, this is not a rousing call to arms seeking retaliation or revenge. It does not hold the right of an aggrieved country to protect its sovereign national boundaries. It does not affect the need to strengthen interest or amass overwhelming military power. Instead, it recognizes the widespread nature of the problem and called for innovative international answers. Most important, it put the threat to people, the risk to individuals, as a central issue. This is a statement that was issued by a group called the Human Security Network Association, a grouping of 13 countries founded in 1999 by an initiative of Canada and Norway. Its purpose at that time is to collaborate and cooperate on concrete security matters such as these that were on the international agenda, like artillery, small arms treaty, protection of children, international similar. This group of like-minded nations works from the premise that the basic right of people to live in freedom and fear is challenged by these two overwhelming threats: the uncontrolled force of state violence and the newer, murkier dangers arising from a global underworld of human traffickers, traders, and terrorists. As we all know, the advice of the Human Security Network was not heeded, and the war on anti-terrorism has become the dominant, overarching neglect of the United States. In fact, it's pillars virtually everything else in the world, pushing out most other issues to the side stage. It's given license to a variety of interventions, massive increase of expenditure of arms, a justification for a severe limitation on human rights, and all the kinds of nasty threats from the very teaching interesting as practiced by a key proponent. Counterterrorism is a cliche, without any question or reservation. It's the litmus test of loyalty. You're either for us or against us. It's primary military response, non-collaborative approach, and to finally oppose remote forms of international efforts at alternative solutions. There's witness of recent attempt to summon to undermine the International Criminal Court. It gives renewed vigor to the apostles of realpolitik, brings out the shadows all of those who find notions of humanitarian cooperation, international justice, and the rule of law to be anathema, giving birth to a doctrine of preemption, which derogates to the United States the right to be judge, jury, and prosecutor against any country or any person that considers a threat, running contrary to the half century of international law under the Charter of the United Nations. This assertion of preemption sets in precedent the right of any strong state to move against a weaker neighbor solely on the basis of its own calculation, subject to no other control or calculation, otherwise known as the Hobbesian law of the jungle. As such, it is inexorably the further crisis that will continue to expand the orbit of danger, accelerate cycles of violence as we begin to cease to the impending attack in Iraq. Now, I want to make the approach to you today that this approach is a mistake. We want to successfully combat terror and all those others who threaten the security of innocent people to get on commuter airplanes and find themselves becoming a projectile going into a building. Or the children in northern Uganda, part of a program that we're running through our center, trying to deal with the enormity of a war that's going on that no one recognizes, that shares about. CNN isn't there. The bomb victims in the Middle East, or kidnapped civilians in Colombia. Then I think we need to carefully consider the common sense and pragmatism of the approach that was put forward in that statement by the Human Security Network of 13 other countries.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit DennisMills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.